was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie, please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny S.T., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. In today's episode, we'll be speaking with Elhanan Miller, a rabbi, Jerusalem journalist, researcher, and the creator of the online initiative People of the Book. Its goal is to introduce basic concepts in Jewish faith to Muslim audiences and vice versa. Through a series of innovative animated videos and one-on-one interfaith conversations, People of the Book hopes to foster mutual understanding between Jews and Muslims and contribute to grassroots peace building. Peace in the Middle East is contingent upon better understanding of each other's religious and cultural backgrounds. A better understanding of Judaism can soften the animosity many Arabs in the region feel towards Jews and Israelis, acquiescing to Jewish existence in the land. Similarly, a better understanding of Islam can help Jewish Israelis understand Muslim sensitivities concerning holy sites and other points of conflict. Very little information exists in Arabic about Jews and Judaism, and People of the Book bridges the gap for both the Arab world in Arabic and Islam in Hebrew for the Jewish Israeli audience. So I'm grateful to be able to introduce to you this peacemaker who spends his life bringing more understanding to two peoples who have many similarities if only they would take the time to learn. Welcome, Elhanan.
Thanks for having me, Penny.
It was great to have you. It put a smile on my face when I learned that the organization Roots Shorashim Judah influenced you also to do your work on People of the Book as they did me. Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Ali Abu Awad were the first peace activists I met a few months after our fateful trip. They're in my book, and I've interviewed many people from their organization for Peace with Penny. So please tell us about your invitation from them in 2017 and who you were going to speak to and how People of the Book developed after that.
So Roots Judur, which you mentioned, brings together Jews and Palestinians in the area of Gush Etzion, south of Jerusalem, so settlers and Palestinian villagers. And they invited me and another friend to lecture on basic Judaism and basic Islam to the other religion. In other words, Islam 101 for the Jews and Judaism 101 for the Arabs, and each in their own language. So I had to prepare a short series of lectures about Judaism in Arabic. and introduce, my faith, my religion, on the most basic level to a group of villagers who don't know much about Judaism. And I prepared this elaborate lesson plan, theological, philosophical. And it turned out that the villagers that showed up to that lecture weren't interested so much in the philosophy or the theology, but rather in the mundane day-to-day practices of Jews. So what do we eat? How do we pray? Technically, meaning how do we bow? How many times we bow? Clothing, what do we wear on our heads? What's this strange thing, right? I'm wearing on my head. What is tefillin that we wear when we pray? What is a talit? The things that are visible and the things they knew about. So that's where the idea sprouted in my head to make this more accessible to Palestinians, well, to Arabs in general. I figured if this is what a few villagers were asking me, in this rural area in the West Bank, there's probably another 500 million Arabic speakers out there. And maybe 1.5 billion Muslims, if we go even broader, that might be curious about the same questions. So that's when the idea began in my head to create a platform that would educate Arabs and Muslims about faith from a very personal perspective, from my own perspective. And then the question was only how to disseminate this and what approach to take. So it was clear to me that social media would be the platform. And the platforms I used most then were Facebook and YouTube. So that's where we work. And then the question was, what kind of videos should we produce? What kind of content would we produce? And I saw a few examples of cartoons on Facebook, which impressed me. And I thought that using animation would be a very effective way of sort of disarming the animosity and the tension and trying to create light content, which would be both educational but also non-threatening. And that's how the idea began. And that's how I created my first cartoon about kosher food and its similarities and differences with halal food. And that cartoon went up in July 2017. I was actually doing a Yiddish course in Lithuania that summer. So I uploaded this video from Vilnius, but that's when it all started and the rest is history.
The world has become, so accessible.
Yeah.
Wow. So you started in, was it 2017?
Yeah, the summer,
And who's your audience as far as Arabic speakers and who as far as Hebrew speakers?
Okay, so I get very good information from YouTube, very accurate information about who my viewers are, meaning what countries, what age groups, sometimes even what education levels. I think Facebook sometimes provides that too. And YouTube tells me that my audience is made up of almost a quarter Saudis, which is very unusual and strange to me, but I'm trying to figure out why so many Saudi Arabians are watching these videos. So close to 25% Saudis, then about 10% Egyptians and about 10% Iraqis. And then from there, North Africa, like Algeria, Morocco, and Facebook also Syrians, Iraqis, and Egyptians primarily. So those are the countries where it's viewed the most. It's a young age group that's watching me on these platforms. I think about 70% of my viewers are under 34, mostly university educated. For some reason, 3/4 of my viewers are men and only 1/4 are women. Also trying to figure out why that is.
Wow, that really surprises me because usually, I don't know, I so much of peace work actually, which I regard, although this isn't directly, but a lot of viewers seem to be women. That'd be really interesting to find out why that is.
I think it mostly has to do with access to social media and maybe time.
Yes, you're right.
I don't think it has to do with the interest that men have more interest in it at all. I think it has to do with the access to these platforms more than anything else.
Yes, I think you're right when I stop to think of it.
Yeah.
Have you any indication what drives their interest in the Arab-speaking countries about Judaism?
So I think there's a range of answers to that. In Saudi Arabia, which I mentioned, there hasn't been a Jewish community in 1400 years since the, I'd say, driving out of the Jews or the defeat of the Jews by the armies of Muhammad and Islam in the early days. There's been no Jewish presence in the Arabian or in present-day Saudi Arabia. So I think Jews are somewhat of a mythical creature for many Saudis. They've not met Jews on a personal level. They have no memories of living Jewish communities. In other countries, the motivations are different. I think they go beyond practice and religion. They have to do with nostalgia and a certain sense of affinity towards the history of those countries, because places like Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Syria all had historic Jewish communities that date back millennia. And I see a lot of nostalgia and a lot of warm feelings by Muslims in those countries to the Jewish presence. And so I think there's a range of motivations, really.
Before we go too much further, I wanted to show one of your clips that I love because it's in English and it's explaining to both Jews and Muslims the other. And it's about the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount. So,
hey everyone, I'm Elchanan and I'm Jewish.
I'm Suha and I'm Muslim. Today, we're going to discuss an extremely holy site, Al-Aqsa.
You mean Temple Mount?
Temple Mount? Don't Jews pray at Al-Buraq?
Oh, you mean the Kotel. Like you, it's actually the mountain behind it, which is most significant.
Oh, really? How so?
Let's start at the beginning, the very beginning. We believe that on that mountain rests a rock from which the entire world was created. In the book of Genesis and the Torah, God ordered Abraham to sacrifice his son on Mount Moriah. We believe Mount Moriah is actually Temple Mount. Many centuries later, but still about 3,000 years ago, God ordered King Solomon to build him a temple in Jerusalem, the city which his father, King David, made capital of the Kingdom of Israel. That temple, or Beit HaMikdash in Hebrew, stood for 400 years until it was destroyed by the Babylonians. 70 years later, a second Beit HaMikdash was built by the Jews returning from exile in Persia, but that one too was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans.
Interesting. We call Jerusalem Beit al-Maqdis, and you call your temple Beit HaMikdash.
So, why don't you tell me about Temple Mount in Islam?
You mean Al-Aqsa? One night, around 1400 years ago, the Archangel Gabriel came to the Prophet Muhammad and led him on a magical night journey, called Isra, from Mecca to Jerusalem. At the mountain, Muhammad tied his magical animal, Al-Buraq, at the wall. He ascended to the heavens, where he met all the prophets, including Moses and Jesus, and received the commandment of prayer 5 times a day. After his return for several months, Muhammad led Muslims in prayer in the direction of Jerusalem before the Qibla switched to Mecca.
That's why Jerusalem is holy to you.
Of course. By the end of the 7th century, 2 monumental Muslim structures stood on the mountain: the Dome of the Rock, built over the same holy rock you mentioned earlier, and Al-Aqsa Mosque on the southern end of the plaza. Both were constructed by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik. The entire plaza is known as Al-Aqsa or Al-Haram al-Sharif, and is holy to Muslims. According to our tradition, praying on Al-Aqsa is worth hundreds or even thousands of regular prayers. Jerusalem is our 3rd holiest city after Mecca and Medina.
Jews have been praying 3 times a day toward the Temple Mount for thousands of years. For centuries, Jews have been praying at the Western Wall, which is the last remnant of the Second Temple. The wall is also the closest place to where the temple once stood where Jews can pray, since the exact site of the temple is too holy for Jews to pray today, according to Jewish law. Access to the mountain was also restricted by foreign rulers over the centuries.
So can I ask you a sensitive question?
Sure.
Do you want to rebuild your temple?
Well, it's complicated. We do pray for God to rebuild Beit HaMikdash in the future. But until God decides to do so, our synagogues and the Western Wall are where we traditionally pray.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You call it Temple Mount and the Kotel,
and you call it Al-Aqsa and Al-Buraq.
But I think we can agree that it's one of the holiest places on the planet.
So we need to protect it and respect it for all of our sakes.
That was terrific, as they all are. How do you choose the subjects of your clips and go about making them?
So the video you just chose actually has an interesting story. I worked on it together with Rabbi Daniel Roth from the organization Mosaica. And it was commissioned really by Daniel and by Mosaica in order to provide an explainer for the Muslim clerics and audiences, as well as the Jews that his organization works with, in trying to explain the holiness of Jerusalem. And this was probably this was definitely the most sensitive video that I've produced. We both measured and weighed and worked on every single word in that script because it's such a sensitive topic. And it was a very pretentious, presumptuous endeavor to pack in both histories, right? A dual narrative history from the Jewish perspective and the Muslim perspective into one 3-minute video, and do it in a respectful way that doesn't offend anyone. And even in the animation, you can see that, because the animation in a way suffered because of Muslim sensitivities about drawing images of the Prophet Muhammad and drawing the Archangel Gabriel and drawing other prophets. So we had to mention these prophets as part of the narrative. Moses and Jesus and Muhammad are all considered prophets in Islam. So instead of actually showing an image of what, a drawing, a painting, a sculpture of what, artistic depictions were of these people, of course, Muhammad doesn't have any artistic depictions because you don't draw him. But we couldn't use any depiction of any of these prophets because that offends Muslim viewers, which is something I learned early on, that I got offensive comments from viewers in some of my earlier videos. And as a lesson from that, and also as a part of consulting with, Muslim sheikhs or clerics that Daniel works with, we ended up sort of animating sort of shadows of Moses or of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And what you have flying from Mecca to Jerusalem is a flying ball or orb that says Gabriel or Muhammad in it with wings. So it's a kind of very crude way of animating it, but that's part of the reality when you're trying to appeal to a Muslim audience and not offend people. So sometimes the animation or the artistic sort of side suffers because you want to respect people.
Well, yeah, definitely. That's how it is in piecework. It's easy to step the wrong way.
Exactly. So I've learned that also through, reactions of viewers and comments. But to answer your question, I guess I started out making videos that would be the most non-controversial and non-offensive that I could think about, and then slowly moved into issues where there's less commonality. So I started with like the softball issues of kosher, like food. It's a non-controversial issue. That's why I started with it. Moved on to prayer, which is also very similar. The structure of our prayers, the number of prayers, there's a lot of similarities in prayer between Judaism and Islam. Clothing, also a non-threatening issue. And then slowly I moved into issues where there's more difference, like Shabbat, for example. I produced a cartoon about Shabbat. Islam doesn't have a weekly day of rest. Friday is a day of gathering. It's a day of prayer. But the idea of rest is not something that exists in Islam as a concept. And then later on, I even did polemical videos, meaning videos where I actually debate or argue or try to clarify certain things about Judaism that Islam, I feel, gets wrong or misrepresents. But I could only do that after a really long time of building trust with my audience and making sure that I can do that in a respectful way that doesn't offend, my viewers.
What's been the reaction to your video clips and cartoons?
So very diverse reaction. I think when it started out, there was a lot of suspicion among viewers. They didn't know what my agenda was. They weren't sure whether I was trying to convert them to Judaism or whether I was trying to be an Israel advocate or do hasbara, pro-Israel advocacy. And of course, I wasn't trying to do either of those things. Both of those were not part of my agenda. I am Israeli. I'm a proud Israeli. I live in Jerusalem. I was born in Israel. But my agenda is never to defend Israeli policies or Israeli government policies. It's really about two things. It's about education primarily, but education as a means of peacemaking. And I really believe that knowing more about the other side and connecting to them on the emotional level and on the cultural level is a prerequisite for what today is very fashionably called people-to-people peace, right? Around the Abraham Accords that are being forged now, people are talking much more about the idea of culture and faith as the basis of peace between countries and societies. And this wasn't the case, a few decades ago when there was peace with Egypt or Jordan or even the Palestinians. This was peace that was forged by elites on both sides. And I would say largely secular elites that didn't see religion or culture as something particularly important in the process. So here is a new, I guess, attempt to try something new. But the world is catching up, I feel like now, the new agreements are talking more in that language. And I think that language is important if we want the people to be on board.
Well, where have your videos been shown? I know you seem to be able to do a lot of work, even because of the Abraham Accords. Can you talk how this has expanded your access to different countries?
Sure. So this tan you see on me is because I just got back right in the middle of the winter. I'm tan suddenly because I just got back from the Emirates last night, where I was filming for a week in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi, the two main Emirates. And it's really remarkable. I visited the Emirates 3 years ago for the first time before the peace as a Canadian citizen. I have Canadian citizenship thanks to my parents. And I was very much an oddity, and it was very exciting to be there when no Israelis could be there. And when I got back to Israel after that trip, I was there with a delegation from NYU's Bronfman Center and Rabbi Sarna, Yehuda Sarna, who heads the Bronfman Center and is now also the chief rabbi of the Emirates, because the Emirates NYU has a campus in Abu Dhabi, a large campus, and Rabbi Sarna would go back and forth for years. And thanks to his connections with the Emirates, he became the chief rabbi when the peace was signed. Anyway, so I went there as this sort of lone Israeli 3 years ago, and then I came back last year. And the change was remarkable. I heard there were 100,000 Israelis last December, that is December 2021. Tourists, or 2020 rather, sorry. December 2020, there were, in the height of COVID, the Emirates were one of the only places that Israelis could travel to without restrictions. So all the Israeli tourism went to Dubai and to the malls. Wow. And yeah. So
wow, that's a difference.
Yeah, so the change within the span of 2 years was absolutely stunning. And now I came back for the third time, and I was able to do filming in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and film Arabic-speaking Jews, including the chief rabbi on the ground, Rabbi Eli Abadi in Dubai, a Yemeni family living in Abu Dhabi who was being protected by the ruler of Abu Dhabi and given refuge from the war in Yemen, and others, and visit museums and other points of interest. So the freedom that I can enjoy as a practicing observant Jew and Israeli in the Emirates is something unparalleled in any of the other Arab countries, including the ones that we have peace with. In Egypt, I visited Egypt a number of times. There's nothing even close to the amount of freedom that you have in the Emirates in Egypt. You can't walk around with a kippah on your head in Cairo or in Alexandria without fear. So the impact is that I can actually travel to these countries and film, for example, as I did last week, a Torah dedication, a Torah scroll dedication in the Jewish community, the now newly sort of established Jewish community of Dubai. So people are now donating Torah scrolls, some of whom are dedicated to prominent leaders and figureheads in the Emirates. And, you know, the future, at least in that sense, with the more remote countries, looks very rosy. Maybe less so with our neighbors, the Palestinians, at the moment, which is, of course, much more important. But these new horizons with some of the Arab countries, I think, are also promising.
Out of curiosity, what's the Jewish population there at this point?
So I don't know the exact numbers, but they've just established a Jewish Association of Jews of the Gulf. I don't want to misquote the exact name of the organization, but it's headed again by Rabbi Abadi, who's based in Dubai. And there are Jews, you know, in the tens probably living in other countries that still don't have communities. I'm talking about Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, probably even Kuwait. These are Jews, with the exception of Bahrain, which has a 100-year-old Jewish community of Iraqi Jews that came there about a century ago. These countries don't have established Jewish communities. Of course, Yemen, which has an ancient Jewish community. The Gulf countries are mostly expats and business people and diplomats who are working, you know, either in the oil industry or in business or in government or whatever. And you find a lot of Jews in these countries, and some of them live very lonely Jewish lives, you know, in these areas, and they need support, right? They need matzahs on Passover. They need maybe services. So it's really exciting to see now a Jewish organization or supporting these Jews in countries that typically don't have that many Jews.
So getting back to people of the book, you have different types of clips. And can you talk about them and who you share the narratives with? For instance, what's the series Jews of the Middle East?
Sure. So I guess Jews of the Middle East is the third phase that people of the book went through. Let me just go through the second phase first.
Sure, sure. Or you can go from the first to the second to the third.
Yeah, I want to go chronologically as it actually developed right through time. So in the cartoons, I felt at some point that I was explaining things to my audience from a Jewish perspective, but I was kind of looking down a little bit at my audience as people who lack knowledge and are a little bit simple. And that's also how the way we built our cartoons, where you have a Muslim woman who is Suha Khalifa, who was my colleague at the Times of Israel when I was a journalist there. And she's been hugely instrumental and helpful in translating and then narrating my scripts. And she's actually like the Muslim protagonist, right, in the videos. But she has the role of the simple woman asking the naive questions. And I felt like I needed to delve deeper with my audience and give them a sense of parity, right, or of equality with me. And that's when I started searching for a Muslim counterpart, preferably a woman, to balance it, who we could speak sort of at an eye-to-eye level about commonalities and about really deep issues that trouble us as believers in the 21st century. So, for example, conflict between scripture and morality, or being a minority in Israel, if you're an Arab, or food. So there were lighter subjects, there were deeper subjects, and we filmed a series of videos in Arabic and in Hebrew, because those were the two languages that my partner, Thana Jawabra, who was fantastic, now Celia Jawabra. She changed her name since we filmed, and she was a fantastic, candid, honest, deep thinking, deep feeling counterpart. And so I called that series Close Neighbors, sort of resonating with or evoking this phrase or saying both in Arabic and Hebrew that says close neighbors are better than remote relatives or remote brothers. So kind of indicating that we could have similarities as neighbors, right? As fellow Israelis or as fellow people in this land, maybe more so than I would have with a Jew living very far away, or Fana, Celia would have with Muslims living very far away. And that series did very well. It did well in Arabic, but it did even better in Hebrew, surprisingly, because it was picked up by Israel's #1 news channel, Ynet. And these are the little miracles or the little fortuitous things that happen when you create things on social media. You never know where they'll go and who will watch them. And 4 of these videos were shared as articles on Ynet, and on some slow news days, they even became the top story on the news channel. So literally hundreds of thousands of Israelis got to see these videos. And as far as I'm concerned, just that image of a man with a kippah speaking to a woman who's visibly, with a hijab, with a headscarf, who's visibly Muslim, as the top story, just the image, without even going into the article, if you just look at the photo, that in itself has an effect, because it normalizes civil discussion, it normalizes dialogue. So I was very, very happy with how well the Hebrew videos did, which I completely didn't expect. I kind of did them on a whim, sort of for my private YouTube channel, but they got very far. And that takes me to the third, I guess, phase of the project, which is Jews of the Middle East. And Jews of the Middle East kind of also happened by accident, because actually my brother in New York introduced me to a young Iraqi Jewish immigrant called Seen. And Seen told her story of immigration from Iraq to the United States, and spoke about how it was like to be a Jew living in Iraq just a few years ago. And that was very fascinating. And from there, I decided to start doing a series of interviews with Jews who speak Arabic, again, to normalize this idea that Arabic isn't just the language of Islam or the language of Muslims, but Arabic is also the language of Christians and the language of Jews, both historically, right? Our top medieval rabbis like Maimonides and Yehuda Halevi and all these top rabbis, sages, wrote the most important philosophical works in Arabic. But also now, until the 21st century, Jewish communities across the Middle East spoke Arabic. And it's becoming extinct because of historic and political processes. And now we have a generation. So it's basically Arabic is dying out as a Jewish language, just like Yiddish is dying out in certain areas, or has almost died out because of the Holocaust, the tragedy of the Holocaust. So I see value in preserving the heritage of Arabic-speaking Jews. Some of them call themselves Arab Jews. I don't think everyone's comfortable with that, but Arabic-speaking Jews. And so I just kind of search out, and I still do this today. I look for Jews who speak Arabic fluently, who come from that generation. Most of them are in their 80s, 90s, sometimes 70s. And these are Syrians, Yemenites, Iraqis, a woman from Sudan, a guy from Tunisia. And these interviews, which are themselves very nostalgic and full of emotion, and I sort of integrate photos, childhood photos, and photos of synagogues and of family photos. So they evoke a huge amount of nostalgia and emotion in the viewers. And I think those are probably the videos that are most warmly received by my viewership, because they remind people, sadly, of the sort of the history that was more positive in the 40s and 50s and sometimes 60s, when Jews thrived, or at least even if they didn't thrive, where Jews lived comfortable lives in these countries. So this normalizing process, this educational process that I spoke about, another angle of it is the Jews, speaking from a cultural perspective, not from a religious perspective necessarily.
Well, you have so many different angles to what you do as a person, and one is a speaker. And I just, one of your topics that I came across, it said, was speaking to terrorist dads. And as I understand it, it's about the recent wave of Palestinian stabbing attacks that you say has caught many Israelis by surprise. And why surprise? Unfortunately, stabbing attacks are nothing new in Israel, but I did wonder about that. But can you talk about that? Just the topic is, well, it draws you in. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. Well, I do speaking tours and lectures. So if any of our viewers here want to hear, but the title that you just brought actually goes back to my previous career before I became a rabbi, when I was the Arab Affairs reporter for the Times of Israel, and then later a freelance journalist for Tablet magazine, and both for Tablet, and for the Forward, I should say, as well. So both for Tablet and the Forward, and certainly the Times of Israel, my writing as Arab Affairs reporter brought me back again and again to, I guess the epicenters of violence, unfortunately, during the more violent times, which was your motivation, right, to start this whole thing, is when you saw the violence. So unfortunately, waves of violence, they ebb and flow. As we speak now, there's another looming danger of uprisings or violence in Jerusalem, in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. So these things come and go. Things are quiet now, but there's no knowing what'll be in the future. And around 2016, there was a wave of stabbings, especially of young Palestinians, sometimes very young, 15, 16-year-olds in many cases. And their stories brought me to Hebron. I mean, I also went into their social media accounts and tried to figure out what was motivating them. But as a reporter, I also went to the field and went and interviewed. I had opportunities to interview a number of fathers of stabbers, or of failed stabbers, I should say, because many of them were killed by the army or by security before they could have a chance to stab Israelis. And what I found out, and this was sort of spelled out in an article I published in Tablet, was that there's this generational gap between the parents' generation and the children's generation of Palestinians, where the parents, this is pre-First Intifada, so people who worked and made their careers in the 80s and early 90s, often speak Hebrew. They work inside Israel. They have Israeli friends in many cases. And what happened post the year 2000, especially with the second Intifada erupting, and then 2 years later, the security barrier or the wall going up and separating physically Palestinians from Israelis, was that an entire generation of Palestinians grew up not knowing Israelis, having no access to Israel, either the job market or schools. And you have a whole generation, especially in the city of Hebron, where people are just grown up frustrated, sad, with the only contact, the only contact they have with Israelis is either with the soldiers that are guarding Hebron or the settlers in Hebron, who aren't always the most moderate. And for a number of different reasons, I sort of built a social profile which showed this generational gap between the dad who speaks Hebrew, who knows Israelis, who is friendly with Israelis, and the children's generation in their late teens or early 20s, who have a very, very different worldview, who are often radicalized on social media. And that's sort of the lecture. That's the talk I have about speaking to terrorists' dads. Of course, that's not the only, angle in which I covered Palestinian affairs, but around the violence, I guess that was my focus.
Barriers, they are always a problem in so many regards, whether internally or externally. So I did want to ask some personal questions because, again, I am curious what created this human being who's been able to work so well in both cultures. And I believe you were born in Jerusalem to Canadian parents. When did your parents make Aliyah and why?
My parents made Aliyah from Toronto, Canada in the 1970s, actually in 1973. So only 2 months before the Yom Kippur War broke out. So their Welcome to Israel party was a major war.
It's like taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present.
Right, but they persevered and stayed and had my brother and I in Israel, and we were raised in Jerusalem in a pretty Anglo Olim neighborhood called Ramot in Northwest Jerusalem. So I grew up in a very English-speaking surrounding in an Anglo bubble, so to speak. My synagogue, my community was very heavily English-speaking. But of course, my friends in school, both in primary school and high school, were Israelis. So I kind of lived in two worlds in a way. I was English-speaking at home and Hebrew-speaking outside. My education was a pretty standard religious, modern Orthodox education in Israel. So I was educated in the public school system of Israel, which in my case meant religious public school system, because I was sent to religious schools. And in Israel, you can get a public school education in the religious stream. So that means that from kindergarten till the end of 12th grade, I was taught by primarily religious teachers, and it became boys only from around grade 6 up until the end of high school. And my high school was a boys' high school called Himmelfarb, which was a relatively prestigious high school in the public school system. And the best thing about it was that it offered Arabic on a very high level, to my great joy, because by the time I entered high school, after middle school, I was very much into Arabic already. And
why?
Which I started.
I'm just curious, grade. What gave you this passion? Because I mean, is it a common passion? I just don't think of Arabic as being the first thought for a Jewish Israeli kid.
You're absolutely right. It's not at all a common passion. Not at all. Israeli Jews don't need Arabic to get along in society or in life. It's very much a luxury, or which isn't the case in the opposite direction. Obviously, Arabs, the 20% Arab minority in Israel, who also study the Israeli curriculum, they have to know Hebrew in order to manage in university and in the job market. But we have the luxury of giving up. I mean the Jewish Israelis have the luxury of not studying Arabic. But I fell in love with the language when I started studying it in 7th grade. My teacher was an ultra-Orthodox woman, like many of my my first teacher, like many of my teachers in primary school. And I guess Arabic was really my first foreign language as an adult, because I grew up bilingual. So I don't ever remember studying English or Hebrew. They were both spoken forever since I was born. And at 13, it was the first foreign language I was studying, and it excited me to a great extent. And I guess I felt I had a talent for languages, or they caused me a lot of fun. And I also saw the similarities between Arabic and Hebrew, of course, which meant that it came pretty easily to me. It went hand in hand, I guess, both the language itself, but also the culture that came with it. And I was always interested in people and how you use language to learn culture and religion, because by the time we were in high school, part of the curriculum. What you get tested on at the end of high school is not just the language, but also classic Arabic literature that talks about pre-Islamic culture and post-Islamic culture. And we have to memorize. I had a teacher who made us memorize Quran, verses from the Quran, and we get tested on it in our finals. So, which came in very, very handy later, because if you can stand there and quote an entire chapter of a Quran to a Muslim in Arabic, it has a huge, it has such a profound effect on the relationship.
Impression, huh? That's something.
And of course, it works on the other way around as well. I mean, I just interviewed now in Abu Dhabi, I just interviewed a very remarkable man who's my age, who took an interest in Judaism and in Hebrew. And he knows how to quote verses from Psalms and the prophets in Hebrew better than I know those verses by heart. And it has a huge effect on you when someone who's not from your religion takes the time and the interest to learn your religion. It has a huge effect. So I'm very grateful to the teachers I had. And then came the army, like it comes for every Israeli. Because there are so few Arabic students in Israel, the army really seeks out people who studied Arabic in high school. And I was more than happy to serve in the intelligence doing Arabic as my military service. So I got trained by the army in colloquial spoken Arabic, and I learned a number of dialects and then served as a linguist in the army. And that was really my true long school, my true education in Arabic came from my job in the army as a linguist. And I guess prepared me for the job market in the things I wanted to do later on, which weren't in security or in intelligence. Once I finished the army, I wanted to take my skills and utilize them in the service of peace and in the service of, forging relations with people rather than being a spy. Not that being a spy is intrinsically a bad thing, but it's just, it's just the question of how you want to use your skills and what, where do you want to guide them or utilize them for. So, that's what took me to journalism, and that's how I became a journalist.
Well, you've always had, from speaking to you and learning about you, the spirit of adventure. And you told me the story of when you were 13 and you volunteered for Magen David Adom, the ambulance system, because you wanted to, that was your first interactions with Arabs or Palestinians. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because just the thought of that is, I think it makes a very interesting beginning to your adventures, your life's adventures. So
the Israeli reality puts you in, I think Israel gives a lot of responsibility to people very young, very early on. And it wasn't 13, it was 15 when I started volunteering. 13 would be very young, but at 15, you can actually start volunteering in Israel in the ambulance services as a volunteer, and you go out to real cases with the driver, who's an emergency, professional, a medical professional. And you can see serious things. I mean, you can actually do CPR. At the time, there were buses blowing up in Jerusalem in the 90s when I was that age. So thankfully, I never went into major suicide attacks. But I did see a lot of violence, including political violence. But these ambulances serve both East and West Jerusalem, meaning they serve both the Jewish population, which is 60%, and also the Arab Palestinian population, which is 40% of Jerusalem. And I guess in my heart, I always used that volunteering as a tool to also improve my Arabic, not just to help people, but also to speak to the Palestinian Arab ambulance drivers, who were quite a few of them, but also in emergencies to get called to East Jerusalem, into the old city of Jerusalem, where there were cases. And I spoke to Palestinians in Arabic. Now, I don't exactly know how I got skill to speak spoken Arabic, like colloquial spoken Arabic. But I guess I somehow picked it up from somewhere and kind of, I guess, adapted my school Arabic to conversational Arabic somehow through practice, through these volunteering experiences. And it's terrible to say, but I would kind of get more excited when I got called to East Jerusalem, not because, God forbid, I wanted Palestinians to be more sick, but because I actually wanted to practice my Arabic and improve my Arabic. Yeah.
And like I kind of alluded to, you've had some really interesting jobs throughout your life. And at one point you were working for the Jewish Agency in Paris. Could you talk, first of all, for our listeners, what is the Jewish Agency and what were you doing in Paris doing that?
Yeah, so the Jewish Agency is one of the main Zionist institutions that predated the State of Israel, and I guess was one of the institutions on which Israel was founded. So our first prime minister, for example, David Ben-Gurion, was the head of the Jewish Agency before he was the first prime minister. So the job of the Jewish Agency has really changed over the years from an organization who was supposed to lobby for the foundation of Israel and mostly bring Jews on Aliyah. And that's still one of the main jobs of the Jewish Agency, is to encourage immigration or Aliyah to Israel. But today, with numbers of Olim really waning and dropping drastically, the Jewish Agency tries to connect communities of Jews abroad and Israel. And it does that mostly through education these days. It has different tasks, but I would say that's the main task is education. And coming out of my master's degree at Hebrew U with a degree in Middle East Studies and Arabic, I didn't really find a job fast enough. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I sent my CV out to many places and got no calls back. And in my, I don't want to say in my despair, but I figured if I'm not finding a job, I'm not going to just hang around, but I'll volunteer and do something else. And the opportunity came up to volunteer with communities abroad. A number of communities in the States were also offered, but I started studying French on my own when I was in the Army.
How many languages do you speak?
I'm working on my 7th one now. I can't say that the 6th.
They are
Hebrew and English, Arabic, French, German, Yiddish.
Holy moly.
I can't say that all of those, and now I'm working on Farsi or Persian is my 7th that I'm working on. I can't say that they're all at the same level. Sure. But the first 4 plus Yiddish are pretty good, pretty conversational. German is tough. I've neglected that language, and also Yiddish kind of overrides it. But anyway, so that's what led me to Paris. I was already basically conversational by the time I'd finished my master's, and I thought it would be a nice adventure to live outside of Israel for the first time, because I'd never really lived outside of Israel. Even though I visited many countries, I never really lived. And so that was the first time I actually spent almost a year teaching Jewish studies to Jews in Paris in a large private school called Yavne in Paris. And it was a great experience. It was, it connected me again to the world of Jewish education, which would feature now later in my life, again, now to Arabs. But that kind of built me as an educator, I feel, and gave me the skills to teach, which I use today.
And as a rabbi, you actually had a pulpit in Australia. How'd you end up there?
Right, so that's much more recent. I became a rabbi, I should probably say this, I became a rabbi through a program that opened in Jerusalem in 2016 called Beit Midrash Harel. And Harel is an modern Orthodox ordination seminary, rabbinical seminary that ordains men and women. So that change is happening now within modern Orthodoxy. And I was very happy to be part of this wave of innovation that sees men and women as equal certainly in the rabbinical pulpit. And I graduated in 2019 with my ordination in September 2019. And 6 months later, I found my first rabbinic job as a rabbi in the capital of Australia, in Canberra. And for me, it was very much to experience the life of a pulpit rabbi in a small Jewish community, very far from Israel and from the US, for that matter, and really experience the whole gamut of community rabbinics, from sermon giving to classes in Talmud and Torah, to preparing bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah boys, and to conducting funerals, unfortunately, during the height of COVID, which was also a very challenging experience. So I landed in Canberra really as COVID was starting in the end of February 2020, and spent 10 months of a 6-month contract. I extended the contract to December 2020. And yeah, so not so much connected to the Arab world, although I did have some interreligious meetings during that time, very limited because of COVID, but I did have some of that, but this was primarily about Jews in the Jewish community.
Yeah, I couldn't resist delving into your personal background because it's been so very interesting. But now I want to get back to people of the book. So I'd like to share some videos. First, let's show a clip about the Jewish prayer explained to Muslims. I loved how it pointed out some similarities between Muslims and Jews. So again, let me share my screen.
Hi everyone! Today Elchanan joins me to explain...
Sorry, Suha, I'm really in a hurry. The sun is setting and I haven't prayed Mincha yet.
Mincha? What's that?
Mincha's the name of our afternoon prayer. Religious Jews pray 3 times a day. Shacharit in the morning, after sunrise, Mincha in the afternoon before sunset, and Ma'ariv at night, after the stars come out.
How do you know exactly when to pray? Do you have a muezzin like we do?
No, but some Jews use an app on their phone to remind them to pray.
So you pray just 3 times a day, not 5?
Exactly. Our prayers were meant to replace the animal sacrifices which were held in the ancient temple of Jerusalem. Another tradition holds that our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, established Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. In our prayers, we face Jerusalem, just as you face Mecca.
We can pray alone, anywhere. Can you do the same?
We can, but it's always better to pray in a group of 10 Jews. Any Jews, known as a minyan.
All right. And do you do anything special when praying?
We cover our eyes as we read a prayer called Shema Yisrael, which speaks of our love of God and adherence to His commandments. It's quite similar to your Fatiha, actually.
That's it?
Well, the guidelines are quite flexible for us, except for the prayer of Shmoneh Esrei, the climax of our ritual where we must stand still without moving, ignoring everything happening around us.
Shmoneh Esrei, as in 18? 18 blessings is a lot.
It's actually 19, don't ask. During this prayer, also known as the standing prayer or Amidah, we bow 4 times. We bow right to the ground like Muslims only twice a year, during the festivals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where the prayers are very long.
Okay, what happens if you miss a prayer? Are you allowed to make it up in the next one?
Depends. You can only do that if you had no choice. Why do you ask?
Because the sun is getting really low.
Suha!
Did you want to share anything special about that particular clip?
Yeah, I mean, it takes me back to the very beginning of the project. This was the second video. This was the second video we produced. And it was a bit of a rude awakening in a way because I made 2 faux pas. I made 2 mistakes with my audience in this video, and it taught me a lot. The first was that, I mean, I give my animators a lot of a complete free hand in adding humor and making the scripts that I write funny, because I'm a little bit serious and they really want the viewers to laugh, and it's been hugely successful.
So you have help with that. You get your funny bone. You import your funny bone from other writers.
I try to be funny, but a lot of the laughs come from the visual side. So the animators have this idea of how to draw things in a way that will be funny. And when they drew the cat jumping out in fright when the muezzin calls, I got and still get complaints from viewers that I'm hostile to the call to prayer, that So the lesson number one that I learned was when there's humor, it has to be self-deprecating humor. When you're talking about religion, you can laugh at yourself, you can laugh at your own religion as much as you want, but you can't laugh at the other people's religion. And Muslims are very, very sensitive to people making fun of their religion. I would say as a generalization that Muslims aren't usually very humorous about their religion. So for example, Woody Allen can make jokes about Jews, right? Or Seinfeld, but if someone else makes them, that could be misconstrued as anti-Semitic or interpreted as anti-Semitic, right? So we have those sensitivities too, obviously.
Oh yeah.
The second mistake that I made, which I learned from, was that my animators drew Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You could see that at the beginning of the video, as there's a tradition in the Talmud that they established the daily prayers. So we drew kind of innocent cartoons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And some of the commentators or the viewers were saying, you can't draw the prophets. It's offensive. So from here I learned, and you showed the video of Jerusalem, that I can't draw Jesus or Moses or Muhammad. I knew about Muhammad. I knew I couldn't draw him, but I didn't know that all the prophets who are mentioned in the Quran, which are basically all of our biblical characters almost, are off bounds for animation. But I didn't erase the video. It's still there. You can watch it. But those are the things I learned. And I chose prayer because it's similar in Judaism and Islam. So that's why I did that.
Well, we have time, I believe, for one more video, and I can't resist to show the one on Shabbat.
Yo, Elchanan, why are you in such a rush?
It's Friday afternoon and I need to get home to prepare for Shabbat.
Shabbat? That's the Jewish day of rest, right?
Exactly. Let's start from the top. According to Jewish belief, God created the universe in 6 days, then stopped on the 7th. Judaism commands us to emulate God. We work for 6 days and rest on the Sabbath.
Okay, so what's the hurry? It's still Friday.
Right, but the Jewish day begins at sunset, not sunrise. Women traditionally welcome the Sabbath by lighting 2 candles. Then we head to synagogue for a special evening prayer filled with spiritual singing.
Sounds cool.
When we return, we sanctify the day with a blessing over wine, known as Kiddush. Our dinner feast begins with 2 loaves of bread called challah.
Just 2?
It's meant to remind us of the Exodus from Egypt. During their voyage through the Sinai Desert, God sent the people of Israel a double portion of heavenly food called manna on Friday, so they wouldn't need to collect it on the Sabbath.
I heard you basically can't do anything on Shabbat.
That's so untrue.
Can you cook?
No.
Can you drive your car?
No.
Can you watch TV?
Nope.
Can you flush the toilet?
Yes. We can also take walks, eat lots of food, play games, and pray. On Saturday morning, we come to synagogue and read a portion of the Torah and the words of our prophets. Like Friday prayer for Muslims, our rabbi also gives a sermon.
So when does Shabbat end?
When 3 stars appear in the sky, Shabbat is over.
And I bet you have some strange ceremony here too.
You got it. Havdalah, or separation. We say a blessing over wine, smell spices, and gaze at a candle in a dark room. All our senses are active. Havdalah is the end of the holy period of Shabbat and marks the start of a new week. So, wanna come over for Shabbat?
Thanks. But let's meet on Sunday, alright?
Sure. Shabbat Shalom, Suha.
Shabbat Shalom, Elchanan.
Anything about that particular one?
This maybe is a good opportunity to speak about about some of the feedback I got from the Jewish side, actually, because from the very beginning, it was clear that the Judaism that I depict or that I present outward is not universally accepted as the Judaism. Right?
Mm.
It's my Judaism. It's the Judaism as I know it, also as my animators experience it, and they're pretty much similar to me. So the depictions of what a Shabbat looks like is very much the Orthodox, probably modern Orthodox, or even I would say Israeli Zionist Orthodox way. And you can see this in the way that people are dressing, the kind of classical, I'd say heteronormative, man-wife role divisions between the woman who lights candles and the man who goes to synagogue, which is a choice, I guess, to depict it that way, because that's more or less my Judaism. It's kind of mainstream Judaism as it's seen here in Israel, where these videos are produced. But I acknowledge the fact that it's not universal. And I tell my, commenters on the Jewish side that it's a subjective presentation of how I experience Judaism. But I have made adaptations on the episode that we have on clothing, for example. When we talk about kippah, I say, and talit, I say in some communities, women wear kippah and women wear a talit during prayer. And I did this because I became more aware, following certain conversations I had with Jewish viewers and friends who commented on that I should probably present a more diverse cross-section of what Jews are like. But I know I'm not really doing that. I know I'm mostly presenting my version. I'll say in parentheses that I also think that version is more close to Islam and maybe creates more affinity with Muslims, because Islam, like Judaism, is a Sharia or is a halachic religion. So it's a religion that is based on practice and laws. So if you adhere to the Judaism version that doesn't see practice or legalism, right, and rituals as the center of your Judaism, then you might be a little bit more distant than the average Muslim. So the average Orthodox Jew, I think, is more similar to the average Orthodox Muslim. So my orthodoxy, in a sense, helps me, I think, communicate on a more visceral level with my Muslim followers.
For your final question, what's your next big goal for how people of the book would be used for peace?
Wow, that's a challenging question. On one level, I guess I would like to find a partner who's Muslim, who shares my worldview of being self-critical and funny and innovative about religion. So we could also do the other way around. And I'd love to partner with someone who would do more. And I know I've spoken to you about this, Penny, about whether we do the other direction too. And for now, it's mostly Judaism explained to Muslims. I would like the other direction as well, but it has to be authentic and come from someone Muslim who genuinely wants to explain Islam from a personal place. I have a master's degree in Islam, but I'm not going to explain Islam to a Jewish audience. It's not for me to do that. This project is about personal expression. I guess I have a dream kind of to be the rabbi that, communicates with the Muslim world and uses my language skills to build bridges and have meetings with very senior Muslim figureheads and leaders as people of faith. But maybe beyond that, just religious diplomacy, I guess you could call it, using culture and religion as a tool to create diplomacy. So that's the big dream. I don't know exactly what form that might take, but that's the vision for years down the road.
Well, I know I've expressed to you my opinion that there'd be a huge market for what you do in all these Hebrew schools and religious schools in the U.S., selling it to our kids, that we drag to Hebrew school and such. I've
heard that. I've actually heard that other Jews who were telling me that a lot of stuff, that they learned a lot of new stuff from my videos, which makes me very happy too.
Yeah, yeah. I learned as an adult as well, from your videos, and it's very enjoyable. And when I think of kids and growing up, and you've got the vision of your parents dragging you to Hebrew school, etc., that to make it more enjoyable would be a great thing. So
Oh,
I personally
actually,
loved it, but I don't think that's the general impression when you're a kid. But I just love learning. Anyway, thanks so much, Elhanan. Your work is both educational and entertaining, and as I said, I see so many instances like in Hebrew or religious schools here. And speaking of schools, next week on February 22nd at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we'll be talking with Roy Silberberg, the director of the School for Peace located in the mixed village in Israel, Wahat al-Salam Nev Shalom, which is a unique and inspiring cooperative village jointly founded by Israeli Jews and Arabs. School for Peace is also an uncommon educational institution founded in 1979, offering Jewish-Arab encounter programs in the spirit of their mixed Jewish and Arab community. Although they have existed for over 40 years, unfortunately, in September 2020, they had an arson attack and the school was burned down. They have continued anyway, using other buildings and within the town, and they fundraised to rebuild the school. But when we meet with Roy, we'll discuss both their history and the current struggles that they're facing. We hope you'll join us as we discuss what has been an inspiring experiment for decades and its current very real challenges. And for now, we close wishing that you all live in peace, shalom, and salam.